There is a moment, and you have felt it, when you are the most qualified person in the room, and the loudest voice telling you otherwise is your own. You prepared, you studied, you have the evidence, and none of it silences the signal running underneath everything, the one that says, not yet, not good enough, not you. Neuroscience does not call this a character flaw. It does not call it weakness or insecurity or lack of confidence. It calls it a circuit, a measurable, mappable, reproducible pattern of neural activity that fires before you speak, before you act, before you decide, and reframes everything that follows. What you call self-doubt, your brain calls protection, and it has been protecting you from the wrong thing for a very long time. Self-doubt is not an emotion. That is the first clinical correction. What is experienced as doubt, the hesitation, the second-guessing, the inability to trust your own competence, is the output of a neural conflict resolution process centered in the prefrontal cortex and its communication with the anterior cingulate cortex. These two regions do not evaluate your actual ability. They evaluate the gap between expected outcomes and predicted outcomes. When that gap is large, when what you expect of yourself does not match what your brain predicts will happen, the anterior cingulate cortex generates what researchers identify as conflict signal. That signal does not feel like data, it feels like doubt. And because you experience it as a feeling rather than a calculation, you treat it as truth. It is not truth. It is a prediction, and predictions can be wrong. In 2001, Matthew Botvinick and colleagues at Princeton published findings that would reframe how neuroscience understands internal conflict. The anterior cingulate cortex, a structure running along the inner fold of the frontal lobe, activates specifically when the brain detects incompatibility between competing responses. It does not evaluate which response is correct. It signals that a conflict exists. In performance contexts, this matters critically. When you have invested years building competence in a domain, you carry two incompatible neural representations simultaneously: your documented evidence of ability and your brain's predictive model, which was built on earlier, less competent versions of you. The anterior cingulate cortex detects this incompatibility and fires. What you feel is doubt. What is actually happening is your brain running an outdated model and flagging the discrepancy. The problem is not your ability. The problem is your brain's filing system. The default mode network is a constellation of brain regions that activates when you are not focused on external tasks. Buckner, Andrews-Hanna and Schacter's 2008 landmark research established that this network is not dormant during rest. It is processing self-referential information, thoughts about who you are, how you are perceived, what you have failed at, what might go wrong. The default mode network is your brain's resting state, and for a significant portion of the population, that resting state defaults to threat-oriented self-evaluation. Every moment you are not actively engaged with a task, waiting before a presentation, lying awake before a decision, pausing between actions, the default mode network runs. And what it runs, for many high-functioning individuals, is a quiet but persistent audit of inadequacy. You are not choosing to doubt yourself in those moments. Your brain is doing what brains at rest do. In 1978, psychologists Pauline Clance and Clance and Imes identified a pattern they named the Imposter Phenomenon. Their research documented high-achieving individuals, academics, executives, professionals, who systematically attributed their success to external factors: luck, timing, an error in the system that had not yet been corrected. What they found was not rare. Subsequent research would establish that approximately 70% of high-functioning individuals experience imposter phenomenon at clinically significant levels at some point in their careers. Crucially, the intensity of doubt did not correlate with actual ability. In several studies, it correlated inversely. The more competent the individual, the more accurately they recognized the complexity of their domain, and the more they perceived their own knowledge as insufficient. This is the competence paradox. Genuine expertise generates genuine doubt, because expertise is the capacity to see exactly how much you do not yet know. Self-doubt does not remain in the brain. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system governing the body's response to perceived threat, does not distinguish between external danger and internal criticism. When the anterior cingulate cortex generates sustained conflict signal, when the default mode network runs threat-oriented self-evaluation, the HPA axis responds. Cortisol releases. Heart rate elevates. Cognitive load increases. Working memory narrows. Research published in Psychoneuroendocrinology has documented that chronic self-critical thinking produces cortisol patterns statistically similar to those generated by external social threat. Your body is responding to your own thoughts as though they represent physical danger. The physical experience of performance anxiety, the shallow breathing, the contracted thinking, the loss of access to what you know, is not weakness. It is your body executing a threat protocol based on instructions from a voice that has never been independently verified. The clinical literature on self-doubt identifies 4 primary behavioral manifestations. Over-preparation, the compulsive accumulation of evidence that cannot satisfy the underlying signal because the signal is not processing evidence, it is processing prediction. Hesitation before visibility, the delay before speaking in rooms you have earned the right to speak in, the revision of work that does not require revision, the postponement of decisions already made. Attribution error, the consistent transfer of credit for successful outcomes to external factors, while simultaneously claiming full ownership of failures. And finally, comparison, the neurological process by which the brain measures your internal experience against others' external presentation. A comparison structurally incapable of being fair and structurally guaranteed to produce inadequacy. These behaviors are not personality traits. They are the measurable output of a neural circuit doing exactly what it was designed to do. What makes self-doubt clinically significant is not its presence. It is its architecture. Researchers studying confirmation bias, the tendency to selectively process information that confirms existing beliefs, have documented that self-doubt operates through the same neural mechanism. Once the brain adopts a model of the self as insufficient, it filters incoming information through that model. Positive feedback is dismissed, processed as exception, coincidence, or social obligation. Negative feedback is amplified, processed as confirmation of the underlying truth the brain has already committed to. The circuit does not evaluate evidence objectively. It evaluates evidence through the lens of the prediction it has already made. This is why reassurance rarely resolves self-doubt. You are not offering the circuit new data. You are offering new data to a system that has already decided how to interpret new data. The loop does not need your agreement to run. It runs anyway. Clinical research on high-performing individuals does not identify the absence of self-doubt as a marker of exceptional performance. It identifies the relationship with doubt. Work by Fleming and Raymond Dolan at University College London on metacognitive accuracy, the brain's ability to accurately monitor its own certainty, found that high performers do not experience less doubt. They process doubt differently. Where lower metacognitive accuracy produces paralysis, doubt functioning as a stop signal, higher metacognitive accuracy uses uncertainty as orientation data. The question shifts from, "Am I good enough?" to, "What specifically do I not yet know?" This is not a motivational reframe. It is a clinical distinction in how the prefrontal cortex processes the output of the anterior cingulate conflict signal. The circuit still fires. The doubt still exists. But the architecture around it changes, and what once functioned as a ceiling begins to function as a compass. Neuroscience has now documented, across dozens of independent research cohorts, that the internal voice generating self-doubt is not a reliable narrator. It is an error detection system running outdated predictive models. It is a default network executing threat protocols on incomplete data. It is a cortisol response, treating internal criticism as physical danger. It is a confirmation loop, selectively processing information to maintain a belief it adopted before you had evidence. None of this is truth. The doubt you carried into rooms you had earned. The hesitation before words you had every right to speak. The credit you gave to luck for outcomes you built. None of it was an accurate assessment of your ability. It was a circuit. And for years, you have been living inside its conclusion.